Snow lingered in the creases of the high country, even though spring had begun its slow crawl across the land. The wind carried a scent of wet pine and ash, like a memory that refused to be forgotten. A man stood outside his cabin, shoulders hunched against the chill, axe in hand. He wasn't splitting wood to keep warm. He was doing it because routine was the only thing he hadn't buried. His cabin sat where the treeline gave way to the open basin, a one-room holdover from a time before everything he knew turned to cinder and silence. Inside, the fire crackled low, the logs hissing like they had something left to say. But the man didn't listen. He hadn't listened to much in years. Not since the war ended. Not since the fire. He was a tall man, but time had rounded his posture like river rock. His beard, once auburn, now carried more frost than fire. His eyes, clear but distant, had learned the shape of grief. It wasn't something he wore on his face. It lived deeper, in the places no one could touch. He didn't expect a knock. It came just past dusk, soft and unsure, like the knuckles didn't want to wake a ghost. He stood still by the hearth, breath held, listening. Another knock, firmer now. Not wind. Not animal. Someone living. When he opened the door, he found a woman. She stood straight, rifle slung across her back, oilskin coat clinging to her like a second skin soaked in weeks of travel. Her hair was tied back tight, jaw set like stone, but her eyes betrayed her. Not weakness. Not fear. Just weariness. The kind that clings to the bones. Behind her, 3 children clung like shadows. One was no older than 3, asleep in a sling across her chest. The other 2, a boy and a girl, stood close to her legs, faces smudged with dust and cold, but watching the man with cautious, hungry eyes. She didn't ask for mercy. She asked for work. We can clean. Chop wood. I'll mend, cook. Just need a roof for a spell. Her voice cracked in the cold. We won't trouble you none. The man looked past her, scanning the darkness beyond, expecting to see a wagon, maybe a horse. There was nothing but pine and sky and the dying light of day. He didn't answer right away. Silence stretched long between them, broken only by the sleepy murmur of the toddler shifting in her arms. The boy flinched at the sound, like he'd learned to fear even the smallest noise. Finally, the man stepped back from the doorway and nodded toward the fire. Get warm. She didn't thank him, just moved. Like gratitude was a luxury they couldn't afford. Inside, the cabin felt smaller with 5 bodies in it. She set the toddler down gently by the fire and unwrapped the blanket, revealing a little girl with chapped lips and 2 thin limbs. The boy, maybe 10, crouched near the hearth and reached out as if to touch the flames but stopped short, watching the man like a deer poised to bolt. The girl, slightly older, sat down without a word, eyes fixed on the floor, hands curled into fists in her lap. The woman kept standing. The man stirred the fire with an iron poker, sending sparks fluttering up into the chimney's dark throat. Storm's coming, he said. I know, she replied. Where you headed? She hesitated, then lied. East. He let the lie sit. She had the look of someone running west, away, not toward. But he didn't press. The kettle hissed as the water came to a boil. He poured 2 mugs and handed one to her. She took it with both hands, the warmth making her shoulders sag just a little. You got names? He asked. The boy opened his mouth, but the woman answered first. No need for that. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing more. They sat in near silence, save for the pop of fire and the occasional murmur from the sleeping child. The man leaned back in his chair and watched them, not like a host, but like a hunter trying to figure out what sort of animal had wandered into his snare. She didn't offer explanations. He didn't demand them. That night, after they'd all bedded down on the floor, blankets spread out like patchwork salvation, he stood watch by the window, his rifle leaning against the frame. The forest outside moaned with wind. The moon lit the snow in patches like bones sticking through the earth. He hadn't shared his home with another soul in over 5 years. Not since the fire. Not since the letter. The letter still sat in the drawer by his bed, unopened. It was the last thing she ever sent him, back when he still had a brother, and the war hadn't taken everything worth remembering. He looked over at the bundle of sleeping children, and the woman curled around them like a barrier. She had left the rifle leaning against the far wall, but he doubted she ever truly put it down. Her boots were still laced. Her hand twitched in her sleep. At some point, the little girl stirred and climbed up onto the hearth rug, curling beside the dying fire. The man moved to lift her, then stopped himself. She was warm enough, small enough, and if she woke, she might scream. He stared at her face for a long time and saw his own sister's freckles in her cheekbones, saw his mother's chin, saw too many ghosts in people he'd never met. He didn't sleep that night. When morning broke, the wind had died, but a thin crust of snow dusted the trees again. The woman rose early and moved with purpose. She gathered wood, fetched water, and started a stew with the last of his potatoes like she'd lived there her whole life. She didn't ask to stay. The boy helped without being told, quiet, sharp-eyed. The girl followed the man to the barn when he went to feed the mule, said nothing, just stood by the door watching him pitch hay. She didn't flinch when the mule snorted. She didn't speak, but she stayed. He offered them no promises, just space, warmth, a roof. She didn't ask for more. Later that day, he caught her mending one of his shirts, needle dancing in and out of the fabric with practiced grace. When he opened his mouth to speak, she said, "Don't think this makes us family. We're just passing through." He nodded. But when he turned away, her voice followed. "Thank you for not asking why." He paused in the doorway, the wind catching in the trees again like whispers. "I reckon we've all got things we'd rather not say out loud," he replied. The day wore on. The rhythm of shared labor took hold. The silence between them began to shift, from caution to something like understanding. That evening, as the sun set gold over the hills and the pine trees cast long, spindled shadows across the clearing, he stood on the porch and watched the children chase each other around the bare yard. The boy laughed once, brief, startled, and pure. The little girl squealed when the wind lifted her hair. The woman stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching them with a gaze heavy with both sorrow and hope. He felt something shift in his chest, something tight and unfamiliar. It wasn't joy. It was the fear of it. The fear that letting them stay meant risking the ache that always followed. But for the first time in years, the ache didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a thaw. He didn't know their names, didn't know their past. But as the stars blinked awake above the cold black pines, he understood one thing. Whatever brought them here had ended, and something new had just begun. The thaw came slow that year, like the land didn't trust the warmth. Snow melted into cold mud, and the sky stayed the color of tin. The trees dripped all day and froze again at night, holding onto winter by their knuckles. But inside the cabin, things were shifting, quietly, almost tenderly. The woodsman had never known what to do with time, not since the war, not since loss made each day feel borrowed. But now time filled up, mending fences, hauling wood, showing a boy how to strike flint, how to hold a blade so it didn't bite back. The boy asked few questions, but he watched everything. Listened too, like he was storing each lesson in the cracks of his bones. The girl surprised him more. She said little, but her hands were never idle. She swept floors without being asked, rubbed oil into the mule's coat, sewed up the split in his coat sleeve with a precision that didn't belong to someone her age. She didn't smile much, none of them did, but there was a steadiness to her, a kind of quiet grit. Like her mother. The woman never offered her name, and he never pressed. But he started thinking of her in pieces, a flint edge, a warm kettle, the stillness of someone who's lived through fire and refused to scream. She never took off her boots unless she was sleeping, never let her guard fall completely. But she laughed once, just a little, when the toddler crawled headfirst into a barrel of dried beans and came up looking like a dusted biscuit. It startled him, that laugh. Startled her too, maybe. They locked eyes across the room, both unsure what to do with something so light. At night, he still stayed up later than he needed to, sometimes pretending to whittle, sometimes just watching the fire. The boy often stayed awake with him, drawing shapes in the ashes or fiddling with bits of metal and string. The man gave him an old harmonica once, barely tuned, dented on one end. The boy didn't play it. just held it like something sacred. He asked the man one night, "You always live out here alone?" The question floated in the warm air like smoke. The man didn't answer at first. "Long enough," he finally said. The boy nodded, as if that was all he needed to know. Then came the signs. It started with a hawk. It's called too sharp, circling too low. Then boot prints near the creek. Faint, but too large to be the children's and too fresh to be old. The woman noticed them first. She didn't say anything right away, just walked differently afterward, shoulders tighter, eyes scanning the tree-line. She slept less, kept the rifle within reach even while cooking. The children noticed. They didn't say anything either, but their games grew quieter, more watchful. He caught her outside one evening, staring down the hill toward the trees. The wind tugged at her coat, and her fingers were white around the rifle stock. "He's close," she said without turning. "You know who?" he asked. "My husband's brother," she answered. "He don't think much of mercy." The woodsman said nothing for a while, just stared at the trees, listening to the wind move through them like a warning. "You run far enough," he finally said, "and the devil gets tired." She shook her head. "This one don't tire." That night, she told him more. Her husband had been the kind of man people followed into bad decisions. Silver tongue, fast hands, slow temper. When the war ended, he'd come home worse than when he left, meaner, always with one foot in the saloon and the other in the grave. She endured it longer than she should have. People always said to wait, to pray. She did both. Then one night, he turned on the girl. Her voice cracked telling it. Not from sorrow, but fury. She'd shot him. Dead before he hit the ground. Took the children, the rifle, and ran. The brother, the one chasing her, he'd been part of it too. Rode with outlaws in the high country. Claimed blood mattered more than truth. And he wanted the kids back. Or vengeance. Maybe both. The woodsman didn't flinch. He just nodded once, slow. He'd known men like that. Had followed some. Had buried others. "You afraid he'll find you here?" he asked. She looked at him then, eyes sharp as glass. "He always finds us." He didn't sleep much after that. They reinforced the cabin doors, fixed the broken latch on the cellar. He taught the girl how to hold a blade properly. Showed the boy how to aim a slingshot with a stone, not just pull and hope. The woman knew plenty already. She moved like a soldier, precise and quiet. Still, in the midst of it, life kept pressing forward. The toddler began speaking more, nonsense mostly, but sweet and warm. Called the woodsman Pa once by mistake. No one corrected her. The man's throat tightened, but he didn't say a word. The boy carved a wooden horse with the woodsman's old knife. Gave it to his sister on a morning when the sun finally cracked through the clouds. She smiled for the first time since arriving, small and unsure. The man saw it. It struck something deep, something that had been buried in ash. But the storm still hung just over the horizon. One afternoon, he saw smoke on the ridge. Not much. Just a thin column rising like a signal. Too controlled to be accidental. Too close to be innocent. He didn't tell the others right away. That night, he went to the drawer near his cot. Opened it. Inside lay the unopened letter, the last one from his brother, never read. Beside it, wrapped in oilcloth, was an old revolver and a brass star, tarnished and long discarded. He took both. He stepped outside under the dark sky. The trees stood like sentinels. The land was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that comes before something breaks. Behind him, the cabin glowed soft with firelight. The woman moved inside, brushing hair back from her daughter's eyes. The boy sat by the hearth, polishing the harmonica with the edge of his sleeve. The girl stood at the window, watching him without a word. He didn't wave, just nodded once. Inside, he heard the door creak open, soft steps on the porch. She came out beside him, silent as snowfall. "You see it too," she said. He nodded. "How much time?" "Not enough." They stood there a while, staring into the dark. Then she whispered, "I don't want to run anymore." He turned to her, saw the fire in her eyes. Not fear, not even anger. Just resolve. "You won't have to," he said. Something shifted in the air then. Not relief, not yet. But understanding. They were no longer just survivors. They were a line drawn in the dirt, and soon someone would try to cross it. Rain rolled in heavy and cold, blurring the mountains and turning the dirt path to muck. The sky hung low, full of menace, the kind of gray that makes a man feel watched. Thunder didn't crack. It growled, long and low, like the land itself was warning them. The woodsman stood at the edge of the clearing, hat brim dripping, rifle slung across his back. His boots sank deep into the wet earth, but he didn't move. He watched the tree line where the smoke had risen the day before. Nothing now, just shadow and water and the slow breathing of the forest. He felt it in his bones, someone out there, circling like a wolf that hadn't eaten in days. Back in the cabin, the woman moved with quiet purpose. The children stayed close, more obedient now, like they'd sensed the storm before it even broke. The boy had taken to shadowing the woodsman, watching how he cleaned his rifle, how he stepped through mud without leaving a trail. The girl spent more time with her mother, hands constantly busy, sewing, chopping, sharpening blades too dull for a child to carry. They didn't speak of the man on the ridge, not in front of the children, but his presence haunted everything, stretched across their days like a thread pulled too tight. One night, the woman laid out a map on the table. It was torn and stained, but her fingers knew it well. She pointed to a gulch west of the cabin. He'll come through here. Too thick north. Too open south. He'll ride the line. The woodsman nodded. You sure? She looked up at him, jaw set. He taught me how to read this land. He didn't ask more. Didn't need to. He could see it in her eyes. This wasn't just about fear. It was about unfinished things. The kind that didn't let you sleep until they were buried deep. That evening, the wind picked up, slamming shutters and howling through the eaves. The toddler whimpered in her sleep, and the woman rose to calm her, humming some lullaby that sounded like it belonged to a different life. The woodsman sat near the fire, oiling the old revolver from the drawer. His hands moved slow, reverent. The boy crept over beside him and watched, eyes wide. You ever shoot someone? The boy asked, voice hushed. The woodsman didn't look up. Yes. Did they deserve it? His hands paused on the cylinder. Sometimes that's not the question that matters. The boy fell silent. Later, when the rest had fallen asleep, the woodsman stepped outside. The rain had eased, but the ground still sucked at his boots. He walked the edge of the clearing, eyes scanning the shadows. When he reached the old pine stump near the barn, he saw it. A mark carved into the wood. Not fresh, but recent. A cross, long and thin, twisted at the base. Not a holy symbol. A message. He stared at it a long time, heart beating slow, but hard. It was a sign he hadn't seen in years, not since his own time running with the kind of men that didn't blink at blood. It meant someone was watching. Someone claiming the land like a predator pissing on a tree. He touched the edge of the carving. The bark went under his fingers. Then he walked back, slow and steady, and barred the door behind him. That night, he told her. The woman sat by the fire, staring at the mark he'd traced into the dirt with a stick. I've seen it, she said. It's not just your past riding in, he said. It's mine, too. She looked up at him, surprise flickering in her expression. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his damp hair, and told her more than he'd told anyone in 10 years. He'd once ridden with a man named Garen Black, a name whispered in saloons and prayed against in mining camps. A killer with a voice like velvet and a laugh that could split a man's nerves. The woodsman had followed him for years, hungry for purpose, drunk on the rhythm of violence. Until one winter, Garen burned a family in their sleep just to make a point. That was when the woodsman walked away. He never thought they'd cross again. But the mark carved in his stump was Garen's calling sign, twisted cross, long tail. It meant death was close. And it had an aim. The woman stared at the fire, unmoving. Her voice came out brittle. My husband's brother. He rode with Garen, too. The room went silent. Maybe he's not just here for revenge, she whispered. Maybe this is something bigger. He didn't answer, just loaded his revolver. In the days that followed, they made preparations. Reinforced the doors again. Dug 2 escape trenches beneath the cabin. hid supplies near the creek in hollowed logs. The children helped, quietly, without question. Fear had tempered them like steel. They no longer flinched at loud noises. They no longer played. The girl found the harmonica and gave it back to her brother. "Play something," she said. He didn't. One night, the boy stood on the porch with the woodsman and asked, "If we die, will people know we tried?" The woodsman crouched beside him, looked him in the eye. "I will. And that's enough." The storm came 2 nights later. They heard it first, hooves in the distance, muffled by mud, but steady. 3 horses, maybe 4. The woodsman stood at the window, rifle ready. The woman beside him with her shotgun cocked. The children were already in the root cellar, huddled close, the girl holding the toddler's hand like it was the only thing keeping them both whole. When the riders appeared at the edge of the clearing, the woodsman's heart went cold. One of them wore a black coat, soaked and glistening, a twisted cross pinned to his lapel. He raised a lantern and called out, voice oily and confident, "Evenin', friend. Fine night for talkin'." The woodsman didn't answer. The man chuckled. "Ain't no need for silence. I got no quarrel with you. I'm here for what's mine." The woman stepped into view. Her voice was steady. "They're not yours." A pause. Then, "Well now, sister-in-law, I beg to differ." The shotgun in her hands didn't waver. The woodsman could feel the tension building in her, like a rope pulled too tight. The man in black dismounted, slow and easy. Another rider followed suit, holding his reins loosely, eyes scanning the cabin. "We got no need for blood," the man said. "Give me the kids. You keep your quiet life." "No," the woodsman said. The man in black laughed. "You don't even know what you're protecting. She lied to you. Lied to everyone. Her husband was a thief and a traitor. And she survived him," the woodsman interrupted. "And that's all I need to know." The man's eyes narrowed. The game was over. He drew. The woodsman was faster. 2 shots cracked like thunder. The man in black dropped to his knees, blood blooming across his chest like a dark flower. The second rider fired wildly and fled into the trees. The third never even drew. Silence returned as sudden as it had left. Smoke drifted across the clearing. Rain began to fall again, slow and cold. The woman lowered her gun. Her hands shook. The woodsman stepped outside, walked to the dying man in the mud. The outlaw stared up at him, coughing blood, eyes full of hatred. "She'll ruin you," he rasped. "She ruins everything." The woodsman looked at him, calm and cold. "No," he said. "She gave me something worth ruining for." Then the man died. The storm passed before dawn. The bodies were buried out near the stump with no names and no markers. The boy watched as the dirt covered the twisted cross carved in the pine. No one spoke of it again. But something in the air changed. The weight lifted. Inside the cabin, the children laughed for the first time in weeks. The girl chased the toddler in circles. The boy played a slow, haunting tune on the harmonica, and the woman closed her eyes and let the sound wrap around her like a blanket. The woodsman stood outside, watching the forest. No more smoke on the ridge. No more ghosts in the trees. But he didn't rest. Because he knew peace was never given in this land. It had to be earned and guarded. Every single day. The sun rose slow and golden the next morning, slicing through the trees in long, deliberate shafts. The storm had scrubbed the land clean, but the air still carried the scent of gunpowder and wet soil. The cabin stood quiet, still, but not lifeless. Inside, something had shifted, unseen but certain. The children were up early. The boy fed the mule and gathered eggs without being told. The girl swept the hearth and brushed dust from the windowsills. The toddler followed behind them like a pup, humming broken songs to herself. No one gave orders. The rhythm of living had begun to take hold. The woman sat on the porch steps, sharpening a knife with the same focus she once reserved for watching the treeline. Her movements were slower now, deliberate. Not out of fear, but because she no longer needed to rush. Her eyes were softer, but still wary. Trust did not bloom quickly in hearts that had been hunted. The woodsman came from the tree line with a fresh kill. 2 rabbits strung from his belt, blood still damp. He didn't speak, just handed them off to the boy and leaned his rifle against the porch rail. The woman watched him, quiet. There were no thanks between them anymore. Gratitude had become something deeper. Understood, unspoken. She stood, dusted her hands, and nodded toward the horizon. Someone else'll come. You know that. He nodded. Always do. But this is home now. He looked at her, saw the weight she carried, saw how it no longer dragged her down, but anchored her. He wanted to tell her he understood. Wanted to say that the ghosts in his own bones were quieter now too. But he wasn't a man of words. So instead he went to the cabin and began carving names into the inside of the doorframe. He started with the children. The girl first, her initials neat and straight. Then the boy. Then the little one, who giggled and tried to copy the movement with her thumb. He hesitated before adding her name, the woman's, but only for a moment. Then he carved it just beneath the others, deeper than the rest. Last, he added his own. When she saw it, she didn't speak. Just touched the letters like they were fragile, like they might fade if she blinked. That night, the wind changed again. They felt it more than heard it. The animals shifted. The trees whispered differently. Not the threat of danger, but the call of movement. Something else was coming. And it came in the form of a rider, at dusk. He didn't come fast, didn't wear black, didn't carry a gang or a gun on his hip. Just a coat, a travel sack, and a tired expression. The woodsman stepped out to meet him before the children could see. The rider introduced himself as a circuit lawman out of Pecos, looking into the killing of Garin Black and his crew. Seems some of the folk he ran with are still breathing, the man said, dismounting slowly. But the world's a bit quieter now. That you're doing. The woodsman said nothing. The lawman eyed him, then nodded toward the cabin. You got a family in there? The woodsman didn't nod. Didn't deny it either. The lawman reached into his coat, pulled out a folded paper. There's a bounty still open on Garin. Dead or alive. Don't reckon you'll take it, but if you know who did it, you might at least want the law off your back. The woodsman took the paper, glanced at it, then handed it back. He died facing a choice. He chose wrong. The lawman gave a half-smile. Most do. He lingered another minute, asked no more questions. Didn't ask about the woman or the children or the blood on the porch from 2 nights past. He looked out at the trees, at the rising moon. Well, he said, just wanted to be sure I wasn't looking at another problem. You're not, the woodsman said. The lawman mounted his horse again, tipped his hat. Keep your heads low, and if trouble finds you again, make it regret the walk. As he rode off, the woman stepped out from the shadows beside the door. She hadn't spoken, hadn't revealed herself, but she'd been listening, always listening. You could have told him the truth, she said. I did. They stood in the fading light a long while, neither speaking. The stars were starting to blink into view, soft and cold. Inside, the fire crackled. That night, they sat around the table, not with fear, but with purpose. The girl told a story about a bird trapped in a chimney who'd flown free once someone opened the flue. The toddler spilled her stew and laughed so hard she nearly tipped over the chair. The boy played a few soft notes on the harmonica, just enough to fill the room, just enough to say, "We are still here." The woman reached across the table and touched the woodsman's hand. She didn't squeeze. Didn't need to. He didn't pull away. Later, long after the children had gone to bed, he stepped outside and watched the moon settle over the trees. The land was quiet again, but not silent. The kind of quiet that comes when things are where they belong. He thought of the war, of his brother's letters still unread, still tucked away. He thought of the fire that had taken the old home, of the names he carved inside the door. He thought of how grief doesn't vanish, it just finds new shapes. She came out beside him, arms crossed, eyes to the stars. Still can't sleep? She asked. I sleep enough. You think we'll ever stop waiting for the next shadow? No, he said. But we'll stop fearing it. She nodded, then leaned into his shoulder just enough to make it real. He didn't speak again, just stood there beside her as the land exhaled beneath them. At dawn, the children would rise and run and laugh. They'd gather eggs. Patch fences. Maybe plant something small, radishes, or beans, something stubborn enough to grow in hard ground. The woodsman would sharpen his axe. The woman would hum while stitching a new curtain. There would be no music but the birds, no sermons but the wind. But within those simple things, there would be permanence. A choice made and remade. Not to run, not to forget, but to live. And in a cabin once held together by memory and ash, now stood something stronger. A family not by blood, but by fire survived together. And outside, the trees stood tall, the earth held still, and the quiet no longer warned of danger. It whispered of home,